Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, är USAs största och snabbast växande vänsterorganisation som mobiliserar och organiserar människor över hela USA. Deras just nu mest kända medlem och kandidat är Zohran Mamdani, som sannolikt när ni ser det här har vunnit borgmästarvalet i New York. Vi spelar in det här samtalet med DSAs två coaches, Romer och Ashik Siddique, den 28 oktober, precis innan valet kommer ske. Men kolla in det här, för det kommer bli en intressant samtal om hur vänstern växer och hur vänstern mobiliserar och växer sig över hela USA. Welcome to Sweden, Romer and Ashik Siddique, the national co-chairs of the Democratic Socialists of America. We're going to have a conversation of the DSA, which is the strongest, fastest growing socialist organization in the US at the moment. But to introduce the viewers to you, so I would ask you to explain, how did you get into DSA and socialism? So let's start with you, Megan.
Sure. So I was what I would call, and I don't know if this would necessarily resonate with Swedish audiences, but a Jon Stewart liberal for most of my adult life. I kind of on the left end of the Democratic spectrum, such as it was, sort of liked the idea of, trying to make jokes about how ridiculous the conservatives were, but never really quite knowing what to do about it exactly. In 2016, I was a Hillary Clinton voter, actually, and not enthusiastically, but I really had it in mind that we couldn't really have anything better. It was really a sort of pessimistic outlook on the U.S. So after Hillary lost, I was really, really confused. Like, it didn't make sense to me because my analysis was not one that, that sort of liberal analysis kind of leaves a few too many holes and you miss things. So I thought I should do something. So I started trying to kind of join some different groups, some different activism groups. I even tried to join and work with the Democratic Party, but was surprised to discover that as a general volunteer, there's not really anything you can do in the Democratic Party in most places. It's not a party in that sense. A friend invited me to a meeting of a DSA chapter. They were just starting up. I kind of knew what it was because I'd been following a bit as the election came to a close. What sort of tendencies there were within the movement, like Bernie did get really big. What does that represent? And I'd heard of DSA for sure. But I was pretty skeptical because socialism in the U.S., are you kidding me? That's totally not possible. It's against the tide much too strongly. So I said, yes, I will go to your meeting, but I'm not going to say socialist. That's silly. But I went, and I was very delighted to discover that they were actually organizing. They had some targets identified and some plans for how they were going to change this policy or that politician or the housing conditions in this neighborhood. And I thought that was really inspiring. And as I saw these sort of plans laid out, I was like, oh yeah, this is very clear and reasonable. And so doing that for a while is what made me a socialist. I did not really join DSA as a socialist, but I became one. And, it also coincided with a whole bunch of kind of radicalizing moments. I went to Cuba for the first time. I was fired from a job as an adult educator for English as a second language learners because I had posted something about what we call crisis pregnancy centers, which are fake abortion clinics that we have in the U.S. They're essentially churches, but everybody dresses in medical gear, and you go there thinking you can get abortion services, but actually they tell you lies about abortion, and it's a great trick. And I posted how unethical that was, and it turns out that the board of directors of the literacy charity I worked for had a couple people who were also on the local crisis pregnancy clinic board and did not want me to work for them anymore. And I had no worker protections because I lived in a right to work state. So a bunch of things happened at once, and it all seemed pretty bad. And that also happened while I was discovering socialism. And one of the things about socialism is it made the answers seem much clearer. Suddenly the analysis didn't leave these sort of contradictions that you couldn't quite make sense of. It's like, yeah, of course that happened. Of course capital's going to rally for this, and the ruling class is going to rally for that, and you're going to get twisted out of this or that.
So here you are.
Reasons. So here I am.
Advocating
the rest
for
is history.
socialism all over the world.
Yep.
Yeah, being on the front line.
Yeah, and I always say if anybody can get here, I am a good example of somebody who was very determined to not become a socialist. And it was like always another step of like, okay, well, I'll say socialist, but I'm not saying comrade. Okay, well, I'll say comrade, but I'm not reading Marx. And it just kind of kept going until here I am.
Sort of you fell into the rabbit hole.
Exactly.
Yeah. How about you, Ashik? What was your way into the DSA?
Yeah, I joined in January of 2017 when Trump got inaugurated for the first time. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, but there were a lot of different threads in my life that I think brought me to the left or start to think of myself as a socialist before I joined DSA. I was born and raised in New York City. My family immigrated from Bangladesh. So growing up Muslim after 9/11 was definitely very formative politically, seeing the way that 9/11 was used as pretext for the Bush administration to then start and expand this war on terror, a global war on terror for over a decade in Iraq, Afghanistan, just compounding all over the world, and seeing the atrocities that were done as retribution, but just really using it as a pretext to do what the United States had been doing for decades before that. I think I started to learn that in that period. It was very, I was in high school throughout that period. I went to high school 4 blocks away from Ground Zero. So it was just very close to me and my friends in high school, just, seeing Ground Zero, the base of the attack every day, but just understanding how it was being used by the government was just very, there was this cognitive dissonance the whole time. And But there was nothing we could do about it, we knew that George Bush was bad. We thought the Iraq War was bad. There were these mass protests happening, but I didn't really feel part of it. It didn't seem like there was a point because it wasn't changing anything. So I was kind of apolitical in this, I was very aware of the news and, my friends and I talked about it, but there wasn't really anything we could do about it. And that kind of continued through college. Obama got elected president. We were excited, finally Bush isn't president anymore. But it was kind of all right, now it'll change, right? So then a few years later, after I finished university with a lot of student debt, coming into the job market, and then Occupy Wall Street happened. I was in New York City and just seeing this, mass protest movement, being part of crowds of people who just were starting to articulate what was wrong with the economy and the political system. Was very formative, but then that also passed very quickly, and then it was all right, now what? A mass protest movement didn't actually change anything. So through that period, I was kind of soul searching a lot. My first job after college that I was doing in that period was working at a veterans hospital, doing research on combat veterans who had PTSD from serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think I generally got into that thinking okay, well, this is a problem and we can help solve it, right? The point of our healthcare system or research is to help, but solve this as a medical problem. But through working with them, most of the subjects of the research were, working class, Black and brown people who grew up in the Bronx, and the military just was their option to leave the neighborhood or not end up in jail or something. So understanding how, growing up in poverty and dealing with all of that, and then going to war and being sent to kill people abroad and doing war crimes basically in a way that they were encouraged to do, and then came back and are just kind of left to deal with it. And there's not really a healthcare solution for having done war crimes, So the idea that we could just medically solve that, and just understanding that the research was being funded by the Department of Defense. And the purpose of that was not really to help them. It was either to, somehow maybe give them a pill so that the trauma doesn't feel so bad and then they could go back to war, or you can pre-screen people with biological markers that make them more resilient to PTSD, which would mean they're sociopaths who just don't feel bad about murdering people, So just all like really being there for a few years just made me feel like, whoa, this is really messed up, and like I can't do this. So I started to get more kind of politically engaged. A lot of the people I met through Occupy were also getting interested in the climate crisis. So I started doing climate organizing for a few years. And that's what I think really brought me into a socialist analysis of things, just understanding that the scale of the climate crisis was so urgent, like so, horrifying, but the solutions that were being talked about politically are just like a carbon tax or, just tinkering around the edges in ways that couldn't possibly deal with it. And then understanding a more, eco-socialist analysis of that, like capitalism is the problem and we need system change to address it. So I started reading a lot of socialist, like theory, like things about the climate crisis, and that's when Bernie Sanders ran for president. So when he started his campaign in 2015, I was just like, oh, I could understand how we could start to address things the way he was explaining, the kinds of policies we would need, but also the point being that you have to have a mass movement of people who are organizing. So I was really excited by his campaign. I was making, I was running phone banks for my living room at the time. So all these things were really motivating for a long time, for months. I met people from all walks of life who were volunteers. So that was really exciting. And then when the campaign ended, I was living in Washington, D.C. It was a weird, depressing time to be there already. Like, I feel like I was just, depressed for most of the rest of the year. And then when Trump got elected, it was like a shock, but not a surprise. Like we were saying all along, like Bernie would have won. So when Hillary became the candidate, anyway, so I was in D.C. DSA was an organization that I was hearing about. I started seeing them showing up at protests that I was at, so I just joined, and then that very quickly became my political home.
But I think I can feel that my own experiences from when I, back in the early 90s, got involved with the left in Sweden, also followed the same path. It isn't by a theoretical idea that you join or realize that, okay, I'm a political person. It's the things that happens to you in life that pushes you in this direction. Would you say that is this the answer why DSA and the left and progressives in United States are gaining more and more support because of everyday people in United States feel their own lives being affected of the system?
Yeah, I mean, life's rough in the U.S. For working class people, which is the vast majority of people. Meanwhile, as we struggle to pay for childcare, watch our kids' schools fall apart, can't find a good job, grocery prices are very expensive. Right now, SNAP, which is our supplemental nutrition assistance program, is about to not get paid out for November. So there's going to be, I think it's 16 million children who live in households that rely on SNAP, don't have that supplementary money to pay for food in their house. It's just sort of endless. I mean, it's like this endless fire hose of like terrible things happening. It is not surprising that people are finding a solution that correctly points out who did this to us and who is doing this to us, which is the boss class. It's also not surprising that people are turning toward, at the other end of the spectrum, turning toward fascism and extremism on the right because, it's bad. You want a villain, and the wrong person hands you the wrong villain at the wrong time, or at the right time, I guess, and you come up with very bad solutions. And it's our job to get in there first, I guess.
Yeah, and when you get in there first, when people come to you, when people come to the Democratic Socialists of America, what kind of organization do they meet? Tell me, what's the story about DSA?
Yeah, so we have a chapter-based structure. We're national co-chairs. We have now over 80,000 members all over the country in all 50 states. So at the chapter level, it varies a lot. There are small chapters, there are big chapters. New York City DSA is our largest chapter that's on track to elect Zoran Mamdani mayor of New York City. So for a new member showing up, there are a lot of different ways that you can plug in, but we really encourage chapters at all levels to have a few different types of things going on at once. at least one, outward-facing campaign. That could be an electoral campaign. It could be a labor organizing, solidarity drive. It could be tenant organizing. It could be some issue-based campaign, but just something that gets you out, like in the community, talking to people. And so that's one thing, just have some political work that you're doing that your members are all invested in. Another is social events, just have time to hang out, like meet new people. Like there are all sorts of people who just heard about socialism for the first time or aren't sure and just are curious and want to talk about it.
Yeah, you have some fun things that we could learn from Sweden with runners clubs.
Oh yeah, there are all sorts of things. So, the most common thing across chapters is just like choose a hangout at a bar, like for a few hours on a weeknight or a weekend. So that's something that is very normal. Or after a meeting, like hang out. Others,
it's the most traditional ways of people getting to know each other is having drinks together.
Yeah, and it's also just like, especially in the US, it's very hard to make friends as an adult, Just like people make friends through childhood, like in school, maybe university, in the workplace, or like their family networks. Otherwise, it's just, you have to really go out of your way to like develop hobbies that you do with other people or something, or like go out and socialize with strangers, which most people don't do anymore.
It's awkward and weird.
It's it's been made to be weird. I don't know. So yeah, for people to come together and like start to build a community, like it's about the political work, but the social aspect is really important. Political education, like a lot of chapters have, a reading group or some kind of recurring series, like what is socialism, like Marxism 101, something like that. So those things, if they're all happening together, then people can come through different entry points. You could join a political education event. You could join a social event. And it doesn't have to be drinking. We encourage people to not just be drinking or have things that aren't drinking, because lots of people don't.
Yes.
There's run clubs. There's kind of sports leagues. Very very casual, non-competitive. We're socialists.
Board game night is a big one.
Yeah, knitting circles. New York City DSA does dating events. Although they're very popular, but we definitely want to set good boundaries and healthy social spaces. But yeah, there's all sorts of things that good, chapters that want to be cohesive, bring people in, be really welcoming, and bring them into political work. And understanding that political work doesn't just begin and end in electoral campaigns. It's about, really building collective power and, solidarity.
Yeah, as I visited the chapter in New York a few times, and I can witness on this, that these events are really nice, and it's a very welcoming atmosphere. Even as a foreigner, who don't speak the language perfectly, you feel very welcome and included in the organization. You feel quite at home right from the start, which is amazing. But as an organization, tell me about how is it run? What's the theory of the organization? With you have the national board, and how do you structure the organization? How do you make decisions? Just for letting our more nerdy listeners know how this is working, because I think we're going to need an introduction of DSA here.
Sure. So we have, I think it's like 220 chapters now, something like that. Spread all over the country. We have members in all 50 states, 80,000 members sort of organized into these chapters. The chapters range from New York City, the biggest chapter, like 11,000 members, to some very small chapters that are 20, 30 members. And at the chapter level, chapters have a lot of autonomy. At the national level, kind of what we try to do is develop our campaigns that chapters can then take on, or sort of find the best campaigns that have come out of the creativity of chapters and kind of elevate them and make them replicable so other chapters can try the same thing, and connect chapters that are doing similar work. So if a chapter is doing a big tenant rights campaign, we might say, hey, have you talked to this other chapter that did a very similar thing in similar conditions? Let's make sure you know each other. At the national level, we have a national political committee. It's 27 people, including us, that is kind of the oversight body for the organization in between convention. And convention is our biennial, right? Every 2 years. Fun English fact, biannual is twice a year, biennial is every 2 years. So biennial convention. which is where we make all the sort of big programmatic decisions for the next couple of years. What campaigns we're going to focus on, what types of campaigns sometimes we're going to focus on. Sometimes it's, sometimes it'll be very specific. We passed a labor for an arms embargo campaign at the convention most recently in August. Sometimes it'll be a little more general. We'll say, hey, we'd like to, for example, find and field a presidential candidate for 2028, but we don't say who necessarily, right? Part of the thing is we got to find people. So we have to assign some people to the job of looking and seeing who that might be and what that would look like. So sometimes it's kind of general stuff. Sometimes it's very specific stuff. But that's how we decide our priorities.
Yeah, and from the basics, you can say you're a very decentralized organization. For example, I've noticed that almost every branch has their own logo.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's just fun, though, right?
That's just
so
fun.
we have a design guide, and we encourage chapters to make a logo that sort of fits within the design guide. We have a set of fonts and a set of colors, and so they'll take the little twist. It's in the U.S. the rose is our symbol. I understand that that doesn't quite pair one-to-one here.
It's another tradition.
Yeah. Historically, the rose is of the left somewhere,
but
usually.
Specifically, the rose with shaking hands is the Social Democrats here.
Right.
So in DSA, we're very proud of that. It's like unique and different in our political landscape. So here I feel a little bit sheepish wearing the pin, even though, it's different.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah.
So,
but we know that things change over time.
Sure.
Everyone doesn't have to become more to the far right as social democrats in Sweden. We can accept having the rose and the shaking hands. If you turn left, then we don't have a problem with the logo.
Yeah.
But we encourage, our chapter logos tend to be something with those kind of motifs, but with some sort of local thing.
I see.
So I think Maine has a moose and a rose.
Yeah.
Denver there's this little local rodent that lives in the Rocky Mountains called a pika. It's where Pikachu comes from. They got that idea. So it's this little pika with a rose in his teeth. It's very cute.
Yeah. In Washington, D.C., I was in the Metro D.C. DSA chapter, and their logo is a cutout of the Capitol building, the Greek columns, and then lightning striking and a rose blooming out of the ceiling.
Oh.
And it's I think it's meant to evoke an album cover of Bad Brains, like punk group. I'm now in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is a smaller chapter, and Wilmington, North Carolina happens to be the only natural habitat in the world of the Venus flytrap. So they just recently rebranded to make a Venus flytrap with a rose as the logo. Yeah.
I think we have to some way show the viewers all this kind of logos. But then I understand it's not their official logo. It's but I love them.
Yeah, they're very, very fun.
We could learn something from that, perhaps. But in this situation, you're living under a Trump administration, which is driving the American society towards some sort of fascism. It's hard to argue against that, I guess. It's so many bad things happens. How do you pick your fights? Because I guess there's too many fights. You cannot pick them all. So how do you prioritize what fights to pick at this moment?
I think during the presidential election last year, it was just very clear that, Trump represented the same threat that he did the first time. Like we already knew, the left was way more concerned about Trump again than the Democrats were. And it was very clear because the candidate they fielded, Kamala Harris, coming after Joe Biden, just, were running to the right. Like they were, they drew all the wrong conclusions from the previous few years. So some of the things that are already very animating, like obviously Palestine was a top organizing priority for our membership for the 2 years after October 7th. So that was already a core thing. It was also becoming clear that the right wing was particularly campaigning by scapegoating immigrants and also trans people. And both of those were already causes that were very important to our membership. We have a lot of trans members. We have plenty of immigrant members. So realizing that Democrats were kind of running away from those issues and kind of capitulating to the framing of the right wing, Kamala Harris was running to be as strong on border security as Trump. Not saying she'll deport 10 million people, but talking about militarizing the borders more, not talking about trans people or even capitulating to some right wing framing about it. So we developed campaigns or just organizing efforts, bringing together efforts across chapters around migrant rights and trans rights, and those have continued since the election. I think since the election, just really focusing on building the electoral alternative has been really like even more like it's already been central to our work, but I think just focusing on more cohesive messaging, which we have a national platform called Workers Deserve More that has boiled down our national platform priorities from to, I forget how many
I think
it
it's
is
like
exactly.
16. It's like 4 by 4.
Maybe
Might be 20.
24,
Okay,
maybe
all
as
right.
many as 30. So it's still a lot of demands, but it is boiling down what used to be like an 8-page PDF, just laundry list of things that we wanted that everybody across tendencies within DSA was just like, this is too much. We can't do anything with it. So at least it boiled it down to clear demands. And from within that, I think our chapters that are running electoral campaigns are getting much better at just message discipline around a few core demands. So we can talk more about Zoran, but he's a perfect example of just having 3 demands around cost of living, like meeting at people's economic needs and really addressing just the reality that the right wing, like Trump, has been really good at campaigning, talking about cost of living and economic things in a broad way, but then his solutions are totally ridiculous or he's not really going to enact them. So it's really important for socialists to be really addressing what the problems are and real solutions, and then campaigning to credibly, organize to win them. So and labor organizing is another just core thing. The labor movement needs to be stronger in the U.S. So I would say like the electoral and labor organizing are kind of increasingly 2 pillars of our organizing, and then all the issues we organize around kind of are interwoven through that.
We encourage our chapters to, analyze their local conditions, because there might be some hyper local thing that makes sense for them to organize around that kind of meets the program but isn't necessarily going to be similarly relevant to everybody. So it might be they're tearing down a public housing project or something like that sort of thing. They're not doing that everywhere. They're doing it too many places, but not everywhere, and that might be a major local issue for them. So
yeah, absolutely. And the US is a huge country with differences all over it, of course. But when we discuss your electoral strategy, which we comes back to on, and also we see both of you have this sort of the way into the DSA through from different sides of the Bernie campaign back into 2016. Can you explain for those who aren't that into what are your strategies and how do you think and how do you work with getting people elected? Because you run candidates as on the Democrat sort of ballot or line, but introduce us to how you do. What are your strategies about this?
Yeah, so to explain this, especially to Europeans, I think we have to zoom out a little bit and explain what is so weird about the American system. So
yes, it's weird.
It's very weird. It doesn't make any sense. I don't think anybody rational would have designed it this way.
I guess you would design it this way if you don't want people to run.
That's actually
to be elected,
better. Yeah,
and
that's right.
It's from my perspective, it's formed just to make it hard to run.
Yeah.
Well, George Washington very famously said, "Don't do this exact thing" in his farewell address.
Okay.
And we were like, "Shut up! What do you know? Who even are you?"
So people know of America as having a 2-party system: the Republicans and Democrats. It's really more like a no-party system. At this point, it was different in the past, but at this point, they're kind of just brand exercises. Like billions of dollars are poured into elections from wealthy corporations, from very wealthy individuals to influence what happens in either party. So by the time you get to, a presidential national convention, so much has happened to pour money into shaping who ends up being the candidate or limiting who ends up being the candidates. And then at every level of government, in Congress, like at this point, tens of millions of dollars can be poured into a race to support whoever the business class wants. So for us, there have been efforts to create, third party or independent party efforts. There's the Green Party. There's like Party for Socialism and Liberation, a bunch of others. And, they've tried to articulate a different politics, but just the structure of the 2-party system on the ballot line just makes it very difficult to really win or even get more than a few percentage points unless you are affiliated on a ballot line with one of the parties. So DSA strategy, we call it the party surrogate. It's really building a lot of the core functions of a political party like you have in Europe in a parliamentary system. We have meaningful membership democracy that shapes who we endorse and then works with the electeds in office to set an agenda. We have our own fundraising network. We turn out many people to canvass and really connect to people in the community. And we really expect and like to build democratic functions within our organizations that shape who we get people into elected office. So for us, the ballot line question is, it is of interest. It's one of the top things we debate about internally. There are people who, imagine we can realign the Democratic Party. There are people who want to have an immediate break from the Democratic Party or, envision that as the goal. But across the board, we're just like, we need to build independent power through the organization we have. And so far, it's working really well at many levels. Like Zoran's about to be our biggest win. But all over the country, we have people who are being elected as socialists through DSA as their main organizing support. And more, there are multiple members in office in a city council, in a state legislature, who are operating as a block of what we call like socialists in office. So we encourage chapters to develop, like New York City DSA has a socialist in office committee, like the SIO committee. So that includes the members of the state Senate and Assembly and City Council and their staff and the leadership of New York City DSA's chapter. And they meet every few weeks or maybe even weekly. They have a group chat. They have ways of setting strategy together in an ongoing way. So in chapters like New York, like Portland, Oregon, Twin Cities, which includes Minneapolis and Minnesota, we have these blocks of socialists in government who are working with the chapter to set an agenda. And more they're working like a party, even though formally we're not a political party. We're way more building out party functions than most Democrats.
Yeah, and what I see also that compared to other when you're running a candidate, the other candidates, they are building their own campaign organizations and always starting from scratch almost. Mm-hmm. And when the election over, if they win, they don't keep their organization. You just mobilize people for the election. But what DSA has established is a totally different way, where you actually have an organization that work between elections and you're building institutional knowledge and institutional memory. I read that the New York Post called the DSA New York a socialist army of workers getting out to get to people to vote.
Great praise from our class enemies.
We love it. We love it when our enemies make us look so cool.
Yeah, but I think that isn't this also what can gives you more power, because when the Democratic Party isn't the party or just are being an organization for distributing huge amount of money to candidates, but you proven on and on that organized people beats money. Yeah,
it does, and by not only we're not only canvassing and using this sort of campaign apparatus during election cycles, because in some cities it's 4 years between the next thing, depending on some cities it's 3 months and they have like 1,000 elections a year, and it's very complicated. But where there are those long gaps, you have to have something for people to do, and so we have other types of campaigns that they work on, and specifically important that those campaigns, we're not telling them what to do. Those people who are doing the canvassing are the ones who collectively get to choose who they're going to be canvassing for. Or if it's a campaign, if it's a pressure campaign, maybe what demand they're making, if they're trying to unionize a neighborhood in a tenant union, with a similar landlord or something, they get to help pick that. They get to say, a bunch of us live in this neighborhood. Here's the strategy, and vote on it, and try to convince their comrades of it. And that makes a big difference, right? That ownership of you're the one who decides. If the chapter is endorsing someone, it has to go to a chapter vote. So nobody just waltzes in and is automatically endorsed just because the co-chairs say so. Ashik and I don't have like magic power to declare that we're going to endorse anybody. It's a big vote that happens at every level. So
yeah. You can deep dive into these issues about your election strategies, but one thing that is debated all the time in the mainstream media and so on is who's going to challenge Trump from the Democratic side. And we can see that the mainstream Democrats are having their candidates. It's easy to see some of them already trying to get support. But how do DSA look upon the upcoming presidential election, even though it's a few years in the future? But as you mentioned, as you both witnessed, the Bernie campaign back in 2016 and 20 was super important for the left in the US. So how do you look upon that?
Yeah, so Bernie Sanders was really important for DSA's development between 2016 and 2020. Was this massive wave of growth where we grew from 5,000 people to approaching 90,000. And what's different about this period is that we are driving that kind of growth based on things we're doing. Like Zoran Mamdani is spiking our membership in ways we haven't seen in many years, and he comes fully out of DSA. So
yeah, it's a new situation.
It's a new situation where our choices that we made are what is driving our growth and our engagement of our own members, feeling more invested in our project. We're not, ultimately like love Bernie, but ultimately, he's an individual.
Yeah.
And he's not going to run again at this point, or I highly doubt it.
Not good.
But I'll say my conclusion after the 2020 election, when Bernie didn't win and they consolidated around Biden, lots of people were asking, what are you going to do in 2024? And my conclusion was like, I don't care about the president. I don't think we should get involved. We just need to focus on building the bench from the bottom up, which has been our strategy and has worked really well. But
I think that's a good strategy, building a bench.
Yeah. And then, Zoran is a product of that, which is great. Like, we elected him in 2020, and now he's going to become mayor of New York City. So I think how terrible the presidential election was, it felt really bad to just have no option on the table. Democrats made a lot of effort to just suppress any talk of Palestine at all, despite a lot of efforts from movement activists to insert it in. And they did shape it. Palestine was a core issue, a core reason why she failed. But I think just seeing how it played out, where there was no alternative on the table, I think made a lot of us reconsider the value of at least have somebody articulating the positions and just clearly laying out a positive program, and then we'll see how far we get. Maybe they don't win, but it'll really help raise our profile, help build a lot more interest and engagement with what our project is, like democratic socialism. So at our last convention, which was a few months ago, we did debate and pass a resolution to help find a candidate for 2028 to unite labor and the left. That's really important to us. Whoever it is, whoever this person might end up being, they have to have a strong base in the labor movement. So really thinking about not just the presidential election in 2028, but also thinking about organizing toward coordinating labor unions across the country to toward a general strike or figure out what it would take to organize toward that. So that's following the lead of unions, including United Auto Workers. Sean Fain is the progressive leader after they were formed. So he issued a call for major unions to align their contracts to end on May Day, May 1st, 2028, with the threat of going on mass strike if their bosses resist. So that's very intentional in a presidential election year to force a lot of major demands, both in the union contract negotiations, but also toward the presidential election. So whoever it is, we're going to have a whole process over the next year or two to figure out how we want to figure out who that is. So not going to, we don't know right now. It's going to have to be a collective process. You don't have any name to present
today, you mean?
To us, really the point is it has to be a very deliberate collective process, and whoever it is has to be willing to, to go through it, to work with us. We don't want to start out with an outcome. There are people who might come in with just I think it should be this person. I think you should endorse this person at a local level. But the process has to be something that really engages our full membership and then is credible to millions of people. So yeah, it's going to take a lot of work. Sort of
the opposite of what they did with Kamala Harris.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Socialists are not just going to anoint somebody and then be here's your person you have to deal with, and you maybe actually kind of hate them.
It was going to be Ashik, but he said no.
Yeah, but I think also no matter what the candidate is, if you run one, if you have a candidate from the left, it will affect the debates, the issues that on the topics that are going to be on the debates. Because if you just leave this area for the establishment Democrats in the primary, they will only talk about how they're going to give Israel more money and adjust to Trump and triangulate with the Trump politics. So I think that is important.
Yeah, I think so. And 2024 was a particularly sort of cursed year anyway, because there were no debates, right? And there was no primary. They just decided this, right? Because again, despite the fact that if you did a poll, Democrats wanted to talk about this, but being a registered Democrat doesn't make you a member of the party who has any actual influence. So it was a few, wealthy donors who made the decision. And for a while, they really did seem like they were going to stick with Biden, which was, I mean, we were watching it just like, what are they doing? Like, I don't see it as my job to tell them how to do better.
No.
But I was like really sitting on my hands, like, please,
And
I
actually,
want to type at them.
there are some DSA members who can actually take some credit for finally setting into, the motion, the chain of events that led to Biden finally quitting. But it was really people on the left who were often pushing for Biden to get out, for Kamala Harris to be better, and they just repeatedly did not make those choices, responding to the base that was trying to, help build any kind of alternative to Trump. And they just refused all those overtures, all those efforts. And, we saw the consequences.
Because ultimately the Democrats and the Republicans, in the U.S., we were just talking about this earlier, like they're the same on economics, give or take a couple tiny points. And they only run separately from each other on social issues. And so even when the Democrats are like, well, I'm going to dive to the right on social issues, people really can't see the difference. I'm as incredibly frustrated as I am with people who are like, yep, Trump, that's our guy. I mean, it's terrible. It's a terrible thing to decide. It's not something that I find particularly confusing. I see why they're as upset as they are, and I see that they want something different. And, I do think there's a significant sliver of Trump voters who actually are just racist. I think there are also a lot of them who are depoliticized and have been given bad information, and that bad information just keeps coming and don't see a solution. So instead of given no solution, they pick, at least let's try something different. And this is what we get.
Yeah. And this is what Zoran has done such a great job of communicating with, just a week after the presidential election. So part of Zoran's success, I think, is just showing such a strong contrast between his campaign and the establishment Democrats around Trump. He launched his campaign just a few weeks before the general election in November. And from the beginning, just his messaging was just a very clear alternative to Trumpism.
Yeah.
And after Trump won, he went out and did a bunch of kind of, man on the street interviews with people in neighborhoods in New York City and the outer boroughs in Bronx and Queens that are heavily immigrant and black neighborhoods that historically have been very reliable Democratic voters, but in this election swung toward Trump.
Yeah.
So he just talked to people on the street asking, did you vote? Like, a bunch of people didn't vote. Some of them voted for Trump, who had voted for Democrats before. And he asked why. And a lot of them just raised cost of living issues. Like, everything is getting more expensive. My life is harder. Democrats aren't talking about that at all. They're not doing anything. A bunch of people were concerned about, just seeing what's happening in Gaza, and Democrats helped do that. Just seeing all this military funding increase to Israel, to Ukraine, military budgets just increasing, but nothing is happening here at home. Like, social services are being cut. Everyone's cost of living is getting worse. So especially seeing so much debate at the national level being about stuff happening internationally, but, life is getting worse day by day. And it seems like the military ventures abroad are just always going poorly,
Yeah.
So it's just like such a clear contrast. And then, he was like, well, if somebody was running on fast and free buses, on universal childcare, on freezing the rent, would you vote for them? And they're like, yeah, that'd be great. Nobody ever talks about that. And then he says, I'm running for mayor. And then, this was in October at the very beginning, or in November, at the beginning of his campaign, when he was not really known as a public figure beyond DSA people, basically. So that's really part of what helped him take off. And he was very clearly, challenging Trump on ICE, on Palestine, on so many things. But it was just the clear economic cost of living demands that were showing such a strong counterpoint.
Yeah, and we saw like there was a weird kind of pundit class sneering about it almost became kind of a meme, the price of eggs being $8.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, do none of you have children who eat? Like, I have a teenage son. Like, I got to buy a lot of eggs. I'm like, buying egg futures over here. But that is like, as we're sitting here right now about to watch 16 million American children who live in households that rely on supplemental nutrition assistance not have food. And it's like this sort of, the kind of liberal sneering about like, oh, the price of eggs. Like, it does matter to people. And, the line is always something like, well, the price of eggs was too high, so I had to vote for fascism, And, okay, but the Democrats didn't offer an alternative really to fascism. They ran on more secure borders. They ran on increasing policing. They ran on the things that people see. So you're going to go for the guy who's talking about eggs. I mean, it's awful, but that's...
He at least addressed something that can feel matter to you.
Yeah. So if they would, I'm not here to offer advice to the Democrats, and yet, if they would please just speak to people about the actual things that are affecting their lives, they might have a better chance sometimes.
And just even on economic things, on social services, Republicans are clearly, like, Trump came in with the agenda to slash social services. He put Elon Musk in charge of government agencies to just
almost forgot about that guy.
All parts of the government. I mean, maybe he's out of the picture. I don't know at this point. But yeah, just putting the richest guy in the world in charge of slashing government services, you can have a clear example of what horrible, how horrible the agenda is. And that helps people understand class politics way better. You have literally the richest billionaire in the world who's cutting your services, and Democrats couldn't campaign against that because they're also taking a lot of tech money from billionaires. Kamala Harris probably got more tech billionaire money than Trump did by the end. And, with social services, it's like, yes, Democrats are at least, we're campaigning to defend Social Security or SNAP or Medicaid, but that's just playing defense with already such a small part of the population receiving these services when millions of people don't experience any benefit from the government, or it's just so hard to wade through the bureaucracy to get it. So the idea of a universal public service is something that Democrats have run away from for years. So when Bernie Sanders talked about it, when Zoran talks about it in New York City now, it just makes sense to people. So that's just something that we're not at this point giving advice to Democrats. We're just building with the people who are actually advocating for it. But this is why we're becoming more popular while they are not.
So we're gonna finish this, but you have been in Sweden now for almost a week. What is the most important lessons that you bring back for DSA building socialism in USA from this trip?
We're gonna race to our mics to say that the big one. I think we both agree on this, that in the US, in kind of our cultural imagination of Sweden, you are either a social democratic utopia, or, depending on who's telling the story, a socialist hellhole. Turns out neither of those things are true. But I think we do have, we've been told a lot, Sweden is the place where they solved all the things. And I come here and see you also struggling to maintain the services you have fought for and continue to have to fight for, while they are privatized and dismantled by the right wing. I mean, it's the same right wing we got. It's the same global capital, big money, vaguely weird Christian dispensationalist oddballs who think that if only we make enough people poor, things will be good or something. But yeah, you're in the same fight. We're all in the same fight. You have made a lot more progress over the years, but it doesn't mean that the fight is not acute and is not real and right in front of you.
Yeah, I just see so many commonalities. I mean, obviously there are the particular differences in your structure, but even within the parliamentary system at the national level to the local level, like hearing about how your local party members navigate, coalition with the Social Democrats, or like, seeing if you can find anything to align with some of the right-wing parties on, so that you don't have to rely on the Social Democrats all the time, or like show that you mean business and they can't take you for granted. Like, these are all just kind of realities of governing that I think are like acutely interesting to us in this period, where Zoran is mayor of New York City, like the blocks we have in city council in other cities are dealing with similar dynamics, where we have our agenda as the left. We want to be agitational. We will be oppositional when it matters. But how do we get things done is a question that I think we've already been wrestling with, and it's going to be even more so now. Like, how do we, when there are compromises to be made, how do we also have, clear lines about what we won't compromise on? How do we bring our members along into those conversations? Like, seeing you grapple with those questions like we are is, reassuring. It shows that nobody has the perfect formula, but also we have to struggle in the same ways. So I think that's what I'm thinking about a lot being here.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, and good luck.
Thank you.
Hoppas ni tyckte det här samtalet var intressant och att ni passar på att trycka på prenumerera så ni kan följa kommande videos vi kommer göra om vänstern i USA. Ni kan också gå in på www.denamerikanskadrömmen.se och signa upp på vårt nyhetsbrev och läsa mer om Zoran Mamdani, om Democratic Socialists of America och hela den amerikanska vänstern som vi försöker följa och skildra där.